You're watching them sharpen the blades. The sound echoes off stone walls beneath a palazzo, where tourists will one day sip espresso, unaware of what happened in the darkness below their feet. A woman's breathing comes quick and shallow. She can see the iron devices waiting, polished to a dull gleam, arranged with the precision of surgical instruments. This isn't chaos. This isn't rage. This is procedure. Outside the same city that commissioned Michelangelo's David has commissioned something else entirely. They've turned punishment into performance, suffering into science. And the terrible thing, the thing that makes your skin crawl across 5 centuries, is how proud they were of their innovations. Quick pause here, and I mean this genuinely. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It absolutely amazes me that a story from Renaissance Italy can reach someone in Manila, Montreal, or Mumbai within seconds. That connection across time and distance never gets old. Florence, 1534. The Renaissance is exploding with creativity. Every week brings new paintings, new sculptures, new ways of seeing the world. Brunelleschi's dome dominates the skyline, a mathematical miracle in brick and stone. In workshops across the city, artisans are pushing boundaries, asking what human hands can create that's never existed before. But innovation doesn't choose its direction. The same minds revolutionizing art are revolutionizing everything else, including destruction. Sir Leonard Skeffington has a problem, though he's hundreds of miles away in London. As Lieutenant of the Tower under Henry VIII, he needs confessions from people who won't confess. The rack is old technology now, medieval thinking. What England needs is something that reflects the new age, something that applies Renaissance principles to the human body. So Skeffington, educated in the new learning, fluent in the language of mechanics and physics, invents something no one's imagined before. He calls it Skeffington's Gyves. History will remember it as the scavenger's daughter. And here's the twist that makes it truly Renaissance. Where the rack pulled bodies apart, this device did the opposite. Imagine being compressed. Not struck, not stretched, but folded. Your knees forced against your chest crushed against thighs, head pushed down until you're occupying a space smaller than nature ever intended. The mechanism uses compound leverage, mathematical principles that won't be formally described in physics texts for another century. Skeffington understood pressure dynamics intuitively. He calculated exactly how much compression would cause maximum distress without immediate unconsciousness. Too much pressure too fast and the victim blacks out. Too little and they endure. But find the perfect balance and the body's own systems become the torture. Tower of London expense records from 1535 tell the story in cold numbers. Payments to 3 different metalworkers for components. 12 shillings for iron bands of specified thickness, 8 shillings for precision screws and threading, 15 shillings for assembly and testing. Testing. Read that word again. Someone tested this device before using it on human beings, making adjustments, perfecting the mechanism. This wasn't improvised cruelty. This was commissioned engineering. The physiological effects were documented because the Renaissance documented everything. After 30 minutes, blood vessels in the nose and ears rupture from internal pressure. After an hour, victims report feeling their ribs crushing their lungs, though examination shows the ribs remain intact. It's the compression of space itself, not breaking of bones, that creates the sensation of drowning on dry land. Dr. John Picaton, the tower's physician, left medical notes describing what he called interior drowning, where compressed lungs can't expand properly. His notebooks read like research papers, clinical observations conducted through judicial torture. Catholic priests during Elizabeth's reign were frequent subjects. Father John Gerard survived and wrote about it later. his account smuggled to Rome and published in 1605. He described 3 hours in the device as being buried alive in iron. But here's what haunted him most. Not the compression itself, but its gradual nature. Knowing that each minute brought slightly more pressure. That relief existed entirely in the hands of his interrogators. That he was becoming, as he wrote, smaller than God intended any man to be. The psychological warfare was calculated. Tower records indicate merely showing prisoners the scavengers. Daughter increased confession rates by 40% before it was even used. A letter from the Tower's constable to the Privy Council notes that the mere presence of Skeffington's engine in the chamber oft produces such terror that further persuasion becomes unnecessary. Across Europe, other minds were working on different problems. In German territories and Spain, authorities refined the sawing punishment with disturbing precision. Victims were suspended upside down, secured by the ankles. Renaissance anatomists understood that inversion maintained blood flow to the brain, preventing the quick unconsciousness that might come from blood loss. They had engineered consciousness extension. Gaspar Torella, physician to Pope Alexander VI, wrote clinical observations about such executions in 1505. He noted how awareness persisted despite massive trauma. In Augsburg, 1552, city archives detailed the commissioning of specialized saws. The same guild producing precision instruments for surgeons was creating tools for methodical human division, and they signed their work. The terrible genius was in the standardization. By 1561, protocols existed. Executions were conducted with medical professionals present to document proceedings. Platforms were constructed at calculated heights for visibility. Musicians played drums at measured intervals. Priests recited prayers according to schedule. Every element was choreographed to transform execution into something approaching sacrament. Not all Renaissance innovations attacked the body directly. In 1567, Scotland, Bessie Taylor was sentenced to wear the branks for 6 months. The branks enclosed the head with an iron cage and pressed down on the tongue. This was the criminalization of speech itself, approached as a technical problem requiring a solution. Between 1540 and 1600, Perth alone sentenced over 300 women to wear branks. Town physicians documented permanent jaw damage, dental problems, and scarring. But the psychological damage was considered more severe. Women who had worn branks often remained voluntarily silent for years afterward, trained into voicelessness by iron conditioning. The pair of anguish appeared in inventories from the 1500s. Its innovation was precise control. Each turn of the screw could be measured, documented, creating reproducible results. Manuals specified exact rotations and intervals. Physicians monitored procedures to ensure maximum effectiveness without premature death. They documented physiological responses, creating scientific studies of human endurance. No punishment better exemplified Renaissance cruelty than the breaking wheel. Constructed with precise engineering, it followed exact protocols developed over generations. Executioners broke bones in prescribed sequence based on medical understanding of shock progression. Meticulous records transformed execution into data collection. The technology of suffering had become a matter of state. The display after death was equally important. The broken body woven through the wheel's spokes would be hoisted high on a pole and remain for weeks. Birds gradually disassembled it. Locations were chosen carefully, crossroads and city boundaries, creating geographic markers of authority, vertical monuments to justice visible long after death. Medical professionals attended these executions not to provide mercy, but to document the process. Their observations contributed to Renaissance understanding of anatomy and shock. Dr. Felix Platter of Basel wrote in 1596 that observation of wheel breaking corrected anatomical misconceptions, noting the body's capacity to maintain awareness despite massive trauma exceeded medical expectations. Think about what that means. They were surprised by how long people stayed conscious while being broken apart, and they documented their surprise for future reference. Another innovation made punishment invisible, hiding suffering beneath ordinary rivers. The Renaissance transformed drowning into a precise, repeatable form through specialized drowning cages. These devices appeared across Germany, Italy, and the Low Countries in the early 1500s. They controlled the process completely, regulating depth, movement, and duration. Nuremberg's civic records from 1520 detail commissioning drowning cages from Hans Grunwald. The cages could hold 2 people, forcing couples convicted of adultery to watch each other drown. The city paid extra for mechanisms allowing guards to raise and lower cages without approaching the water, a safety feature. For the guards, each cage required over 200 pounds of iron and 60 hours of labor. Hinges involved 17 separate parts to ensure smooth operation underwater. This was precision engineering designed for aquatic function. Venice developed permanent drowning stations at bridges, using pulleys and winches built into architecture to control multiple cages simultaneously. In 1543, Augsburg used drowning cages for 3 women accused of infanticide. They were lowered simultaneously at different speeds. The last to drown watched the others die first. The City Chronicle records exact durations: 7 minutes, 12 minutes, and 23 minutes after repeated immersion. The engineering evolved to allow repeated immersion. Victims were lowered until unconscious, raised for revival, then submerged again. Winter drownings added another dimension. Holes were cut in frozen rivers. Dr. Heinrich Stromer wrote in 1558 that rapid cooling altered muscle rigidity and suggested applications for preserving anatomical specimens. The cages were often decorated with religious imagery or civic crests. Frankfurt's preserved cage bears Latin inscriptions about justice and mechanisms for attaching plaques describing crimes. This was not just an execution device, but a statement of civic values rendered in iron. The Renaissance transformed quartering into orchestrated destruction. The most famous case occurred in Paris in 1610. Francois Ravaillac faced a quartering requiring a written protocol of 43 steps. The procedure was planned like a theatrical production with timing, positioning, and crowd management. The protocol reads like a director's prompt book. Horses were specially trained to pull gradually. Harnesses distributed force to prevent immediate dismemberment. Precise incisions weakened joints without severing them, allowing horses to complete separation visibly while human hands remained unseen. English quartering followed different principles. Victims were hanged to near death, disemboweled while conscious, organs removed in order to maintain awareness longest. Sir Edward Coke detailed each step. Body parts were distributed strategically across cities as warnings, with exact placement recorded in civic archives. German states added mechanical innovations. Winches and screws pulled limbs apart with mathematical precision. Museums preserve these machines today, engraved with makers' names. The same craftsmen who built clocks and mills applied their skills to human dismemberment. Engineering and execution were indistinguishable. And yet, even quartering retained the body's basic form, however divided. The final punishment went further, attempting to remove the very surface of humanity itself. Flaying, the methodical removal of skin, occurred rarely but was documented in legal codes and medical texts across Europe, particularly in Italy and borderlands with the Ottoman Empire. In 1526, during the Italian Wars, A group of mercenaries who had betrayed their contract were sentenced to flaying in Milan. The execution was performed by a surgeon, not an executioner, highlighting the Renaissance fusion of medical knowledge with judicial punishment. The surgeon, identified as Master Pietro d'Albano, was paid 50 ducats, more than most physicians earned in a year. D'Albano's notes, discovered in the Biblioteca Ambrosiana, describe his technique. Begin with circumferential incisions at wrists and ankles. Create longitudinal relief cuts along natural tension lines. The facial skin requires particular care to preserve features for later identification. Work proceeds in sections, allowing recovery between phases to prevent shock-induced unconsciousness. What distinguished Renaissance flaying from ancient practices was systematic documentation. Observers recorded which areas caused most distress, how long consciousness persisted, what techniques preserved skin integrity for display. The preserved skins served as warnings more powerful than any written proclamation. In Perugia, the flayed skin of a rebel leader was tanned and displayed at city gates for 3 years. The Tanner Guild of Perugia records the recipe. Human skin requires gentler processing than animal hide. Use oak bark tannins at half strength. Add rosemary and sage oils to prevent insect damage. Stretch on specially constructed frames that maintain anatomical proportions. The face must be stuffed with sawdust to maintain features. The symbolic aspects were carefully considered. Removing skin literally removed the barrier between internal and external, exposing humanity beneath while paradoxically dehumanizing completely. The philosopher Marsilio Ficino wrote about witnessing a flaying in Florence. What is man without his covering? The skin defines our boundary with the world. To remove it is to dissolve the distinction between self and other, between human and meat. The punishment doesn't just kill, it uncreates the person. Medical professionals who attended flayings contributed observations to anatomical knowledge. Andreas Vesalius, the famous anatomist, referenced judicial flayings in his work, noting how they revealed muscle structure and attachment points difficult to observe in normal dissection. Vesalius wrote to a colleague in 1543, "The judicial flaying I observed in Padua revealed the fascial planes more clearly than any dissection. The living tissue's response to separation differs markedly from the dead." These observations have corrected several errors in Galen's muscular descriptions. The rarity of flaying made it more powerful as threat than practice. Most Renaissance cities had laws permitting it for specific crimes, particularly treason and sacrilege, but actual implementation required extraordinary circumstances. The possibility of flaying, the knowledge that authority could literally remove one's surface, created psychological control beyond its actual use. By the late 1500s, flaying had largely disappeared from European practice. The formal abandonment marked a transition in punishment philosophy, from destroying bodies to controlling minds, from physical obliteration to social elimination. We return to those chambers beneath the Palazzo Vecchio. The stones are worn smooth now by tourist feet. The iron fixtures removed to museums where they're displayed behind glass with small plaques explaining their function in language carefully chosen not to disturb. But something remains in those spaces, in the precise calculations, in the careful documentation, in the systematic transformation of suffering into procedure. The hands that painted the Sistine Chapel designed machines to destroy human bodies. The minds that mapped the heavens calculated exactly how much pressure human joints could withstand. The mathematical principles that created perfect architectural proportions were applied to calculating perfect suffering. The Renaissance didn't simply create beauty. It created horror with equal innovation, equal pride, equal belief that human reason could perfect anything, including the destruction of humans. What we've witnessed isn't the story of barbarism, but of civilization at its most confident. The same systematic thinking that categorized plants and mapped stars, categorized crimes and mapped suffering. These weren't failures of the Renaissance, but expressions of it, showing what refined cultures create when they turn refinement toward refined cruelty. The real horror isn't the physical pain these devices caused. It's the intellectual brilliance behind them. The same creativity that produced the Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile produced machines designed to remove smiles permanently. That duality challenges every comfortable narrative about progress, about the relationship between artistic achievement and human cruelty, about whether intelligence applied to suffering is still intelligence or something else entirely. In the end, the most terrifying Renaissance innovation might not be any single device, but the transformation of punishment into science, the reduction of human suffering to principles and procedures, innovations and improvements, the application of humanity's greatest gift, our creativity, to the systematic destruction of humanity itself. The chambers beneath the palazzo are tourist attractions now, their terrible purpose sanitized into historical curiosity. But if you stand quietly in those stone rooms, you might still hear echoes of what happens when human brilliance operates without human compassion, when the same minds capable of imagining paradise engineer hell with equal precision, when innovation serves power without moral constraint. That's the shadow the Renaissance casts across the centuries. Not in the devices themselves, which are museum pieces now, but in the thinking that created them, in the belief that reason can perfect even unreasonable cruelty. That intelligence is morally neutral, as capable of designing telescopes as torture devices. That human creativity is just a tool, and tools can be aimed in any direction. The question the Renaissance poses to us isn't whether we're more humane now. It's whether we understand that the same capacity for innovation that creates beauty can create horror. That progress isn't moral, but technical. That civilizations advance in all directions simultaneously, including toward more sophisticated suffering. The iron devices are gone. The breaking wheels have stopped turning. The drowning cages have rusted away. But the Renaissance innovation they represent continues in new forms. Different methods, same precision. Different targets, same systematic approach. The age that produced humanity's greatest artistic achievements also perfected human destruction. They documented everything. They improved everything. They innovated everything, including cruelty. And that, more than any specific device or method, remains their most terrifying legacy. The proof that human brilliance, without human compassion, doesn't lead away from darkness. It just illuminates the darkness more clearly, makes it more efficient, turns it into something we can measure, perfect, and be proud of creating. That's what echoes in those chambers beneath Florence. Not the screams which have long since faded, but the calculations, the measurements, the pride of craftsmen who signed their work, the satisfaction of problems solved and procedures perfected, the confidence of an age that believed reason could master everything, including the destruction of reason itself.